line that they're following. And this, once again, is just another graph just to kind of detail that, you know, this type of investment is a pretty good investment right now. I'm going to hand it over to Rishab, and he's going to explain to you the Facebook.
Right. So what is Beige Book? So Beige Book is a report. It's essentially a survey which is published by United States Federal Reserve Board 8 times a year. Now, this United States Federal Reserve Board, this is the main governing body which oversees Federal Reserve banks in the United States, and they use this report, this survey, to help Federal Reserve banks implement the monetary policies, you know, around the year. So essentially, this report contains this survey essentially contains the information on current economic conditions, which is reported by the Federal Reserve banks located in 12 different districts. I think Bakar touched upon this in his slides, where there are 12 different districts like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Richmond. So these are the 12 districts, and information is gathered through interviews, like phone interviews, online questionnaires from market experts, bank directors, consumers, economists, and businesses. So information is gathered, and then this survey is produced, which is then used by Federal Reserve Board to implement a monetary policy. It also provides an opportunity to Federal Reserve Board to hear feedback from participants in the economy and understand the future outlook of the economy. So this report actually covers several sections, like what's the outlook for employment and wages, consumer spending, trend in price increase, decrease, manufacturing industry, service industry, and real estate. But this assignment is to talk about consumer spending, like what's the trend in consumer spending for like across the districts, and then maybe we'll cover what's the trend in New York, what's the strength and weaknesses in New York district, because that's our district essentially, since we live here. So for example, in Boston, now this report is it's a qualitative analysis. So far we've been looking at numbers. This report gives you just a qualitative analysis, like how did a certain sector like consumer spending did in like November. So last report was published in November. So this is the data from November report. It was a bit difficult for us to really look at it from this perspective, because we didn't see any numbers, and since we don't understand, I mean, we are not economics experts, so it was really difficult for us. But we try to capture our understanding, like what we understood from this report. It's like 3 or maybe 5 or 6 pages report, I think. So for example, in Boston, for consumer spending, I have to look at these slides because it's a lot of data here really. So like retail sales and tourism was really good. I mean, sales in retail sales were really good, and then in Boston it met expectations of the retailers, which was picked up by early winter months. So the future outlook for Boston, which we feel it's the continued, the sales are going to grow moderately for Boston. In New York, the retail sales, the in-store sales were sluggish, but online sales were they were really good. New used vehicle sales, they remained high. Retail sales, as I said before, it didn't meet expectations, but online sales were really good in New York. As per our understanding, we figured out that the outlook doesn't look very optimistic for retailers in New York district. For Philadelphia, non-auto sales, they grew moderately, but and then auto sales remained high in Philadelphia. Tourism also continued to grow moderately, and then outlook, we feel that it's going to remain at same level. For Cleveland, retail remained low, e-commerce investment remained strong. The trucks and the used cars dominated auto sales. Again, outlook, we feel it's not optimistic for retailers in consumer spending. again for Richmond, retail, sporting goods and construction equipment sales, they were increased. They surpassed the expectations, while tourism spending remained at normal high levels. It's a stable market in terms of spending in tourism. So we believe that it's going to remain the same. And we believe, because that's what it's mentioned in the report. So it's all the data is from the report. So after analyzing the report, that's how we made this decision that why outlook is going to remain same or it's optimistic. For Atlanta, retail sales they were moderately increased, and they surpassed expectation. Auto sales they were increased because of discounts and bonuses that retailers were giving. Tourism spending was mixed, with Georgia seeing steady growth, but Florida saw a decrease in tourism spending. Is it because they have the same district?
Yeah,
Florida.
that's Florida and Georgia.
Georgia is part of Atlanta district, right? So that's that. For Chicago, picked up modest pace, increased sales in food, hardware, auto, service and merchandise. Outlook is expected increase to continue in Chicago district. St. Louis retail and auto sales generally unchanged. Sentiment from households indicates increased sales forthcoming. I'm not really sure about this one. Like St. Louis, do you guys remember?
They look okay though.
Yeah, I mean, it's just talking about how the sentiment from the household. So when they reach out, they have questionnaires, online surveys, all different things like that. So basically, they're getting information back from the households that are saying, yeah, we're starting to make more money. People are getting raises and such. So they're saying that they're expecting increased sales.
For Minneapolis, consumer spending was down across the district. Online spending was increased. Merchandise, as in-store spending was less. New car sales was down, but used car sales was slightly up. So it looks optimistic based on the year-ending results. For Kansas City district, the sale was increased moderately. The consumer spending essentially increased moderately, and then further increase is expected in the next 6 months. Retail and auto sales were among the increased. Food services was slightly down. So that's the outlook. Retail and auto increase, and restaurants are going to increase restaurant sales. For Dallas, retail demands and competition rose. Auto sales saw slight increase. It is also looking optimistic. In San Francisco, online sales were increased, so that caused in-store sales to go down. People are spending more in technology. Tourism is surpassing expectations, so it remains optimistic. The California, the San Francisco district. Now here we compared the strengths and weaknesses of New York compared to other districts. So for example, in New York, the strengths looks like online sales, auto sales, manufacturing and distribution, services sector, industrial space, office construction, commercial mortgages. So these are the strengths that we figured out from the latest report. And in terms of weaknesses, like in-store sales, they were down in the last report. Tourism, high-end like luxury real estate, that was down. Rental market was down. Co-op or condo resale was down, and then consumer and commercial industrial loans essentially, and then both residential and commercial mortgages. So that was a weakness for New York district.
That was went down from the previous
Yeah.
from the
Previous reports, yeah. So I think that's the end of our presentation, and
How many times they heard us that 8 times?
8 times a year, yes. So last one was November 27th.
Yeah, I mean, it's very important to note, like in your presentation where Jen Gillen is presenting, it's based on actual data. These are all anecdotal data, so they just, calling people, this month, we got more than the previous month. There is no actual numbers to see that actually this can happen. Okay, so it's more of, as you said, it's not hard data, like when the Federal Reserve represents anecdotal data.
The
But
most
then who-
interesting thing we saw about it was how each district really specializes in something different. So if you look at Richmond, they have like a high tourism rate, and then if you go back to, Atlanta or something, they don't even talk about tourism because maybe it's not that great there. So, San Francisco, there was a lot of write-up about technology space, so I guess over there, there's just a lot more discussion about technology, so you get
Whereas
nice
in New York,
feedback
we
from different
dominate-
people.
Right, New York is dominated by finance.
It was actually finance, manufacturing, distribution is huge in
Yeah,
New York,
yeah.
and
And
a lot
tourism
of
too. Usually tourism, especially now, if we look at the last report, it should go up.
yeah, this one was saying that tourism was down, and
Yeah.
they were specifically talking about like Broadway in New York City. They really
Okay.
didn't talk about the outskirts of New York. So, I mean, I guess businesses can take that and notice that, look, Broadway's down. So if you're in upstate New York, maybe you say, let's start investing in advertising because there's people here. They want to spend it on tourism. They're not going to Manhattan. So if we pick up our advertising, maybe we could get them to come out to Pennsylvania or upstate New York. So it's a good indicator of how you want to bring your business and attack the trends.
That was gonna be my question, is the audience of this just businesses?
Pretty
8
much,
times
yeah.
a year is a lot to
Yeah.
put this together when it's not really based on any numbers, who's using this, who's
Well,
consuming this?
It's Federal Reserve Board, right? They are using it to implement the policies, like monetary policies. So that's what they use. That's what I read.
I mean, I thought it was-
Alex can know, right?
They don't use this to implement any hard policies, whether or not they want to increase interest rates or not.
No?
Those are
Just for trends.
actual numbers,
Trends.
the ones that are
Yeah.
reported in the report of the Federal Reserve. So, no, this is more or less right about businesses,
It's to
how are
John's
they
point,
doing?
right?
That's what John was
Yeah,
saying
okay.
too, it's not nothing that you're gonna get out of the, we did that because of the beige book. That's why it's published like 8 times a year.
Yeah, sure.
Like my type of construction, we specialize in office construction.
Yeah.
And then when I read this, it says
Commercial.
specifically in New York that office construction is up and we're
Yeah.
doing well, so I was like, oh, that's interesting that they do actually catch the right trend, so.
But listen, it's how the others are feeling that they are in this
Right.
same business, right?
Right.
Without any data to know that this is actually happening.
Right.
So it's more of how are we feeling in
Right.
the construction of office equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is important,
Of
especially for a business.
of course, expectations of consumers and the firms are it's one of the major factors in the economy. We said that. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a sales opportunity for you too, when you're talking to your clients, you mentioned the beige book.
Yeah. It's actually beige, huh?
Yeah, seriously, I'm like, wow, John is really.
See, it's happening, we could invest.
Give them the link to the website.
That'll be before the first glass of wine.
Very good, thanks.
And it's
No,
called
oh,
the,
you want- you
it's
go to-
called the beige book because of the color of the.
Yeah.
Good choice.
It is a very good
John, like when you go to the holiday parties,
very
like, dude, did you
neutral.
catch the beige book? Like, you're like, what?
All right, we have one more presentation. You want to take a break for like a few minutes to get a coffee or no?
Yeah, a few minutes, maybe a few minutes.
Yeah,
be
okay.
great.
All right, so we take a 5 minutes break.
I asked questions, so I'm already.
time.
Your chef goes with the season.
Yeah.
I couldn't find.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that.
About it. Yeah, I watched it last night. Oh, I just watched my.
Right before the presentation.
Are we presenting from my computer?
Oh, so last I saw it, I saw like Happy Lake.
Yeah, she's a senior in college. One of my teachers was like my son.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
like, you're a lot like him. Have you? It was genetics class, which is a lot
Right,
of math.
yeah.
And she's like,
I
I got
dare you
tested.
to go like that, that's great.
He's 19 years old. There's no way this is possible. Yeah, I got tested. So.
You got, she got tested when she was younger. She something,
Oh, because he's a lot
Yeah.
more
Right,
like her.
and
We need to have this one because of
Yeah.
this question. You know, that you
Like he's
and this is something that I haven't been Like this one, she's like, she's so actually, so then once you told me you are okay, then I know.
I'm glad you can relate. There's a lot of people-
Yeah, definitely, yeah, it's exactly the same
It's
thing.
funny. Does she have like certain? It's funny because it's a hindrance in some things like
Yeah.
math, but in other things like history, music, I can pick up. I play 4 instruments.
Yeah.
I taught myself. I just
Yeah.
pick them up and learn how to play them.
But she's pretty good in math actually.
Yeah.
She's more stable in the social studies and things
Really?
like that.
Yeah.
So she gets stuck, over here and stuff here and things like that. So
Yeah.
no, with
It's
the hard
blessing and a
science,
curse
yeah.
with
Yeah,
some things,
exactly.
you know?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's funny.
They say Albert Einstein was this.
Yeah, I think so. Too. And the guy that owns Virgin Atlantic and
Yeah.
Gal Atlantic, yeah, he's just like
Yeah.
the guy
Good.
who live on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a gift and a curse
Yeah.
or something. So
That's
it's all about it's a
Yeah,
perception.
exactly. Yeah, it has nothing to do with level of intelligence or
Yeah.
anything. It's not like you're artistic,
Right.
different stages of that too. I mean, some of them are brilliant. So, but it's funny. So anyway, then I can relate. I know where it's coming from.
Thank you.
So, can I point something out on my file? I just want to show you how I did it.
Sure.
Because I'm always paranoid about probably the very, one of the very bottom.
Oh yeah, you did the first time.
Yeah. So, okay. So I just want, so I try to keep it neat. I'm sorry, I did my best. So whenever you see, I'm saying, here's question 1, right? Fine. Here's start of question 3. I just got here's a big arrow. And so here's the rest of the easy. Okay. And then this was wrong. I kept on going.
Yeah, there you go.
You really got it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think we want to ask a specific question.
No, I think I'll freak out.
Yeah, okay.
If I get something wrong now, I'm not going to give you a good presentation. It is what it is, sir.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't look like it, but I thought, you guys, I don't know, I'm just. But no,
Okay, we're ready.
No.
We don't need everyone else here. They don't need to hear any of this.
It's on tape. They can
It's
watch
on
it.
tape.
They can watch it later if they really want to.
So,
We are in the US, Christina. 5 minutes is 5 minutes, right? It's
That's
good
not,
5
it's
minutes.
good 5 minutes.
we hope you enjoy your gift because it's directly related to
Yeah.
your profession.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and I made the baklava, so.
Yeah.
You had one,
Yeah.
so you know.
No.
Did you try one?
No, not yet.
I have
Yeah.
some out there.
You know not to share.
Yes.
You know not
Well,
to share.
we brought a separate, I brought a separate one so that you
Yeah.
wouldn't have to share it.
The honey that you used, it was,
It's from Greece.
right, okay. And then when you make the honey syrup, you have to boil it a little bit to thin it out? No? I don't know how to make baklava.
Well,
so I
yes
don't
and
know.
I'm not giving you
She's
my
away from
secrets.
Yeah.
I'm not giving you my
You think I
secrets.
can't find out?
You can look online and get one, but that's not my baklava.
That's why she's going to class here, because she's going to open up her own bakery one day. and,
Everyone keeps
Yeah,
Be able
so
to
you
run
got
it.
a
Right
pricing
next door.
model already.
There's a Greek
My-
restaurant next door to my
my,
apartment. I'll go talk to Kostas and say, hey, it says, right? I'll get it.
What's that? My father?
There's a Costa next door.
Oh. So good. What?
They make a baklava. The syrup that I tasted was not as good as yours, not even close. But they thinned it out.
You do thin it out. You use.
How do you
No,
spell
you thin
that?
it out so
No,
that.
no, no,
So what ends up
no,
happening
no.
is you basically like pour it on top of this pot. and
Yeah.
then
It sounds very, it sounds
sit
very
there
similar
overnight,
to
and then it's
like
supposed to
the-
soak it all up and then.
Well,
Portuguese.
I'm
How do you?
glad you gave me a trick, but it was really
Oh,
good.
it's probably different. But it sounds like
It's called baklava.
a baklava. Okay.
B-A-K.
Because it sounds too similar to bacalhau. You know what that is? It's like cod bacalhau. It's like a Portuguese
Dry fish?
codfish. They salt it and then they like it's dried and then they reconstitute it like in water and it's like the saltiest
Isn't
thing.
this in like the Nordics or something?
Yeah, they do that with sharks, but it's a Portuguese like Christmas tradition that they
I'm going over there.
Oh.
And I'm not looking.
have fun. I don't like it. It's too salty for me. You like it?
Nice job.
Poor guy like that.
Compared to my baklava?
Oh, yeah.
Are you kidding me?
You can compare
You can compare Costco baklava to my baklava. I
No, I didn't test in yours. I didn't know you could.
Me too, and I didn't make it.
Yeah. 5 points off.
Do you work for a soulless
5
corporation
points
that
off
deals with cable?
Lost
How many more
I
are
just
missing
thought because
here?
they were wearing like.
Oh,
Good.
my
We're ready to
God.
go.
Everyone
We're
makes
ready
a
to go.
difference.
She's
Everyone makes
Well,
a
Lana's on
difference.
a phone call, so we can
Okay.
go.
Yeah, you can start.
Alright. We're going to be talking about the Federal Reserve today. So a little agenda here. We're going to talk about a little bit of history prior to the Federal Reserve, just because we feel it's important to understand how and why it came about. Then we're going to jump into the structure, the monetary policy report for 2017 by Janet Yellen, and then the current status of the Federal Reserve. Okay. The first bank in the United States was proposed by Alexander Hamilton, chartered in February 1791. It was initially located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was established to establish financial order, credit, to pay off the Revolutionary War debt, and create a common currency. After its 20-year charter expired, the bank's stocks were purchased by Stephen Girard, and it became Girard Bank. And that actually, in just a year later, in 1812, was responsible for bailing out the United States from financial ruin during the War of 1812. The second bank in the United States was chartered under the same principles Hamilton had proposed for the first bank. It was in April of 1816. It was also in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but there's 25 branches across the country. It was generally opposed by most Southern and Western congressmen. In 1829, Andrew Jackson was elected president, and he repeatedly tried to undermine the bank through vetoing legislation and diverting financing, because he thought the whole national banking system was evil and undermining the entire country.
By the way, he was a populist president,
Yeah.
not unlike some people that are in office now.
He vetoed the rechartering of the second bank. The state chartered banks popped up across the country, easing lending standards without proper lending ratios. This resulted in the Panic of 1837, resulted in vast inflation across the country. Martin Van Buren was elected the next president, but he refused to do any increase in government spending to address the issue, effectively dried up credit across the country. This led to the free banking era, which was basically just these state banks across the country taking the responsibility of the national banks. Jump ahead here for a second. National Banking Acts of 1863 and 1864 were a series of federal banking acts that reestablished national banks, created a national banking system, somewhat stricter regulations on all new national banks, but they weren't fantastic, allowed the federal government to supervise commercial banks across the country, caused a boom in national and state banks, resulting in a dual structure system. Jump back for a second. Panic of 1907. This was a series of events in October 1907 that led to the New York Stock Exchange falling almost 50%. Led to many local and state banks entering bankruptcy. It was triggered by an attempt to corner the market of United Copper. After the failed bid, banks that led to the scheme began to suffer, specifically the Knickerbocker Trust Company completely collapsed. This eventually led to a group of New York bankers headed by J.P. Morgan pledging large investments into the banking system with sweeping reforms to clean up most of these issues. Then came about the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, created the Federal Reserve System, signed into law by Woodrow Wilson, allowed the Federal Reserve to issue currency, allowed the Federal Reserve to regulate inflation and make mortgages for farmland, resulting in the U.S. dollar becoming a global currency.
All right, thanks, Ben. So, so about the Federal Reserve System, we all know it conducts monetary policy for the country. What does that mean? It takes care of interest rates like the federal funds rate you guys mentioned before, but that's to counteract inflation or changes in government spending or to improve liquidity in the marketplace by adding money supply. So the point that it promotes the safety and soundness of individual financial institutions, it promotes the stability of the financial system. It also is a regulator. So you've heard of the Volcker Rule, for example. So we found this on the website, and I worked on it for a little bit. Volcker Rule is only one part of Dodd-Frank, and as an example, it stabilizes or doesn't allow insurance companies to invest in speculative investments like hedge funds. So the Fed doesn't just promote, the beige book or take care of monetary policy. It also regulates banks, state banks, member banks, and as well as the system in general. Another thing that I think we all take for granted, and that Bitcoin might solve for everybody, but right now the Fed is a superhero, it fosters payment and settlement of money. So, that's a really important thing, that it stabilizes the currency. Moving on, we talk about the structure of our system. All right, so I'm just gonna read from the slide here because it's difficult to memorize. So there are 12 different districts, each has a separate reserve bank. Other presentations talk about this as well. The boundaries, one of your questions was, we don't know why the boundaries are made. Boundaries are based on prior existing prevailing trade regions. Has to do with population, has to do with the general economy of that region. So, I mean, somebody mentioned, I don't know why we view it always going out west and not west to east or mid-east, because Monroe Doctrine, Manifest Destiny, we went to the west coast from the east coast, and east rules, so that's why. That's why we say it. That's why the North Pole's on top too. But anyway, you could turn it upside down. We could say mid-east region. But the point is that that's why the districts were established that way. And this is just a model of how it works. So you have the reserve system, you have the Board of Governors that makes policy, open market committee. That's the committee that says raise rates, don't raise rates, sell bonds, buy bonds. And then you have the other pieces right here. You guys can read in our presentation. Here's again a map of the districts, and I remember I had something I wanted to say. There are 12 reserve banks. Sorry, there are 12 Federal Reserve banks, each part of these regions, and they're the operating arm of the Fed. Each one's responsible for talking about the economy of their region, providing those numbers back to the main branch so they can effectively make policy. So the Beige Book is just one of those examples. They don't use it to make policy, but like you said, it's anecdotal data that they might take under consideration, and I'm assuming they take under consideration here or there. But the hard numbers are where they make policy, and each of the directors from these regions are the people that are contributing to those. So rates, we said 7 out of 2 people voted for the increase in rates. It was from a different presentation. You know, the regions in those areas, each one of these guys are, or these people are contributing to that decision. So maybe in their region they thought keep rates stable, but we all knew rates were going to rise, and they continue to rise with this, especially with this tax program. And we learned that from Professor. Thank you for clearing that up for us. Right, well, this is just interesting. The Fed pays for itself, right? So this is their revenue, and they get it from the securities that they issue, and the excess goes to the U.S. Treasury. So yay, they pay for themselves. And this is just more about how the system is structured, right? So we have a central governing board. It is decentralized across those regions, like we talked about, and they really govern through the Board of Governors. The directors make the policy decisions. The Federal Reserve banks, the individual banks themselves, and the Open Market Committee, which is the committee about, you know, the function arm that raises rates or sells securities. And they all act independently, which is a very important model, I think, for our country. And that's my piece, and I will hand it back over to Matt.
Yeah, I'm just going to give you a little more information on the Board of Governors. It's located in Washington, D.C. It has 7 members. They're nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate. They each serve 14-year terms, but they're staggered, so there's not really too much turnover at any time. Oversees the operations of the 12 reserve banks and also has the oversight responsibility for them as well. Reviews and approves the budgets for the Federal Reserve banks finally. And like you mentioned earlier, it ensures the voice of the concerns of the consumers are heard. So they basically taking care of everything and managing the Federal Reserve banks, and as well as taking care of the Federal Open Market Committee, which actually is they meet in Washington D.C. every 4 years, determines its own internal organization because it's made of the Board of Governors members sit on it, as well as the heads of the Federal Reserve banks. The chair of the Board of Governors is in charge of it, but the vice chair is actually the head of the New York Reserve Bank. And what else we got here? Makes all decisions regarding the conduct of the open market operations, which affects the Federal Reserve funds rate, and this is the principal tool for their monitoring the monetary policy. And basically jump on to the next part here.
So some other significant entities are the depository institutions, which are banks, thrifts, which are savings, mutual funds, mutual savings institutions, and credit unions. They offer transaction or credit checking accounts to the public and may maintain accounts of their own at their local Federal Reserve banks, but they're required to meet reserve bank cash requirements. In addition to that, there are the advisory councils, which are the Federal Advisory Council, the Community Depository Institution Advisory Council, which essentially gets all the information for the thrift institutions, the Model Validation Council, which is established by the Board of Governors to assess bank stress test models, and then the most recent one is the Community Advisory Council, which was established in 2015 to give perspective on the economic financial services needs of consumers in the mainly located in the lower and mid-income population.
All right, so the second part of our presentation was to give you a summary on what Janet Yellen just recently, her latest testimony, to summarize that, but we have to start with some fun facts. So these are the facts that are important, of course, but I want to share with you a couple others. So she is the first woman to serve as the chair of the Federal Reserve, which she started in 2003, and she's the first female to lead a major central bank in the world. They get better, I think. So she and her husband, who's also another economist, he actually won the Nobel Prize in economy science. They pretty much have the same economic policy views, but they have a stamp collection that's estimated to be worth between $15,000 and $50,000. And the last couple of things is that she grew up in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn. And she was the valedictorian at Fort Hamilton High School. And as part of her stint in high school, she was also the editor-in-chief of her school newspaper. And part of what is tradition there is that the school newspaper editor interviews the class valedictorian. So this was her. And so she actually jokingly wrote in the interview that, quote, "I understand that you are a versatile, attractive, and talented senior."
Very modest.
And she's very modest, and that proved to be true, right? So, and then the last thing, sort of money related, is that she's not actually the highest paid employee at the Fed, which you might think there's actually 113 other Fed employees that make more than she does.
Wow.
And what I found is that she earns $201,700 a year. So there are 113 other people that make more money than she does. But you shouldn't feel too bad for her because she's really a multimillionaire. She and her husband are worth between $5.3 and $14.1 million. So
That's a big range.
take a little hit on annual salary. Okay.
And she doesn't want it because she's probably paying taxes.
Right.
So this is
Right.
better.
Could you imagine the conversation at the dinner table? I totally think inflation's going up. Like, how could you possibly think
He's
that? You're a
saying,
moron.
how about their kids? If both of them are Nobel Prize economists.
Yeah.
Imagine their kids are IQ.
Yeah. I think it's that her son is also.
Board of Governors or something.
Maybe she has two kids. I think I read on they're both economists. So.
Right.
You couldn't escape the economy conversations at their house. Okay, so the next little bit of a couple slides is we're going to just briefly summarize what she says, and based on what we talked about after the last presentation, unlike the beige book, this is based on numbers. So this is the numbers that she presents to Congress twice a year. So overall, she said that they're making progress towards maximizing employment and price stability, which is the whole goal of the Fed, keep inflation down. So the second half of 2016 is what these numbers are. So she reported a bunch on the average job gains were 190,000 at this point, and the number of jobs rose by an additional 227,000 in January. So she's giving a lot of real-time numbers. The employment trough that started in 2010, she talked about how it's now nearly 16 million. So it's on a good trend. And as a result of that, unemployment rate is at 4.98% in January. And what she mentioned here is that that's actually 5 points lower than it was at its peak in 2010. And that was now in line, according to the Federal Open Markets Committee, that other people on the team have talked about, that the participants of that committee estimate it's the long run it's at a normal level. So where it is now, when she gave this testimony in February, it was at a normal level. So let's see. So then she talked also about a lot of improvements, things that are happening. So consumer spending is still on the rise. There have been income gains. There's increases in the value of assets of homes, and consumer sentiment is higher on that trend, and there were low interest rates. In 2016, sales of cars, I think a lot of other people talked about the sales of cars and light trucks as the category, right? So she mentioned that that's not at the highest annual total on record at this point, and housing construction continues to trend up. That was in the beige book. And then the impact on the weak foreign growth and appreciation of the dollar over the past 2 years have restrained manufacturing output. And then she talks a little bit more about home sales and the ongoing labor market. So she does a lot of the specific talking about in her report to the specific categories that have been mentioned by some of the other groups.
Okay, so over the past year, inflation has rose. The total consumer prices measured by personal consumption expenditures, the PCE index, increased by 1.6%, which is still below the FOMC's 2% target rate, but it is above by 1% from 2015. The expectation is that the economic activity and the job market should pick up over time.
Oh yeah, and I forgot to explain something while Christine was doing your notes, is that her testimony was broken into the outcomes and predictions sort of things and expectations, and then the second part was this monetary policy part.
So in the monetary policy part, the committee is going to continue to review the employment and inflation rates to make sure that they're in line with the expectations, and if they're not, then they're going to actually consider adjusting them to the adjustment to the federal funds rate. And then current estimates of the neutral rate are well below the pre-crisis levels, which basically says that it probably is due to slow productivity growth, less economic growth abroad, and strong demand for safe long-term assets. And then overall, the economic outlook is uncertain, and monetary policy is not on a preset course. And then she stressed that the importance of improving the pace of long-term economic growth and raising American living standards. And then it is important to also always remember that fiscal policy is one of many factors that influence the economic market, so you can't just look at that only.
Yeah, she's very committal when numbers are there, of course, right? But when it's looking into the future, you can't really commit too much because you don't know what it's going to do, and there's a lot of
I need that beige book.
you do, you need the beige book.
Alright, just to bring it all together, Janet Yellen's going to conclude her term as the head of the Central Banking System February 3rd, 2018. Jerome Powell was nominated by President Trump to succeed Janet Yellen in November and was approved by the Senate Banking Committee this December. He attended Princeton and Georgetown Law. Since December 2011, he's been serving as one of the Board of Governors and was appointed by President Obama. And just a brief comparison, Janet Yellen is considered by economists as what is a dove, which is more concerned with unemployment than inflation, and Powell is more considered neutral, where he values equal both.
He's not an economist though.
No, he's the first one that's not an economist.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's been there for many years, so.
With no degree.
Yeah, he's a lawyer, so he has a lot of
he served as like the head of the Carlisle Group.
He's not officially,
He should take this course.
Well,
I don't want to
You should take this course.
well, let me ask you a general question to see. We heard the report and what Christina was saying and Kendall too, that the inflation rate is about the target rate of 2%, right? And the federal government right now is trying to follow an expansionary fiscal policy, right, by reducing taxation. So in your opinion, if the inflation rate is at the target level, why are they increasing interest rate?
Why aren't they?
Why are they? No, they are increasing, and they're going to continue doing it. I'm telling you, next year, I will see you like in a year from now, hopefully. We're going to talk about it. I think they're going to increase it at least another 2 times.
Are you asking why they're going to continue?
Yeah.
So I think, well, I remember from the old days, and what I remember about the Fed in general, this is the only tool they have to fight or to influence the economy. Well, not the only tool, this is one of the main tools. So if they don't raise rates now, it's also to counteract the
expansionary fiscal policy.
Exactly. And that was, I think, the reason for your question 3. That was part D of that question. So if that's what they're doing, they're obviously going to raise rates because they're going to maintain inflation or stability so volatility doesn't increase. And 2, if they don't raise rates now, doesn't it turn out to be like the Japanese economy where they're going to be, you mentioned negative interest rates for a long time. They need to have a tool to lower and raise so they can influence monetary policy.
Yeah, I mean, the tools are there. I mean, they do have the tool of increasing or decreasing interest rates. But if we are, I think, you know, we are at what, 4.1%. And as we said, in the long run, this is what we economists call a full employment. You know, full employment means if you want a job, you can find a job. That's what it is. That's what full employment means. And historically, you know, it's been around 5%, and now it's 4%, 4.1. I mean, this is very low. Okay, so, but you still see that, you know, growth rates are not as, you know, it's 1.5. Traditionally, it's been around 3%. So, you know, the unemployment rate, the U, okay, the 6, I think?
Yes.
Yes, which shows is about 8.5%. I think that's what they are thinking, okay, that the unemployment rate is still high, if you ask me. And on the other side, you know, they are thinking, I think the Federal Reserve thinks that if we all believe that the unemployment rate is about 4%, we'll put pressure in businesses to increase wages, because wages have been very stagnant for a long time. Okay, wages do not go up that easily. So all the profits we have seen lately goes through the shareholders and the owners of the firm. So they have not been passed down to the consumers, to the labor. Okay, so if it puts pressure on the firms to increase wages, what do you think the firms are going to do? Increase prices.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that's what the Fed is worried about. You know, they are worried about that putting pressure on the firms to increase wages, the firms will turn around and increase prices. Okay, and they fear that because we think everything is rosy, everything is going well, that this is what's going to happen. And I think that's the major reason I think they are increasing interest rates. Looking beyond the box, you know, looking outside of that. So, because, you know, everybody thinks everything is fine. If unemployment is full employment, you know, the employment rate is 4%, that means, you know, just give more money to labor out. And with all these contingency workers right now, okay, that I'm going to present tomorrow, you know, I'm telling you, I mean, I found the latest data, most of the contingent workers are, used to be in construction and everything. You know where they are now? Healthcare. Healthcare.
Where?
Healthcare. You see all these healthcare facilities, right? Yeah, all of them.
Yeah,
They are
reducing
on
the
contract.
high-end
They are like for a
healthcare
year,
doctors.
they do the job and they are out.
Right. They're reducing the high-end doctors now
Right.
in hospitals. They're adding PAs and the other people to supplement, and one doctor facilitates all these other 20 people. So they're cutting down the high employees.
Can we get a copy of that paper?
Yeah, let me present it for to be some copy. Because it's a working paper, so it's not really you know, a finished product. So
That's a big trend in banking too, right? Where you hire contractors to handle the more expensive regions, even the less expensive regions, and they're seasonal employees. Like, you know, you let them go when you can. And we've noticed just intrinsically it's an increasing piece. Remember when you said that the small business owner just understands economics because he's there every day, does he raise price, you know, they'll just do it. I feel like that, like we just see it, you know.
see what happens. Okay. So listen, honestly, it's been a pleasure. I like teaching this class because of this discussion. I told you, when I teach undergraduates, it's like throwing rocks on the wall, and nothing comes out of it, you know? Nothing comes back. So really, it's been a pleasure. Please, though, don't forget, you know, do the evaluation of the course, because you have to do it for me to post grades.
Already done.
Right? Okay. I mean, you know, half of you already did, the other half not. So listen, I'm going to a conference. I will be back on Wednesday. So I should have everything ready definitely before Christmas, because I don't want to go into Christmas and owe grades to different classes. So I will try to finish everything. Okay, so before Christmas. So listen, have a great holiday, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year to everybody. Okay, all right.
Remember the goodwill with the you know, everything else. That's anecdotal data, by the way.
No, tomorrow.
All right, folks, everybody have a great holiday.
Yeah.
Hey,
You know, you're on campus, you might as well run over there. It might be, because they might hire student workers manning it, and you never know.
We're going to a bar far away, it's probably cut down.
Now it's 3 o'clock.
Mama, it's not that it's free, it's that we're done with our first semester.
And it's all about perspective, Mom.
That's true. That's true. Are you going now? Really?
It's on my way home, so I'll stop. I think I have time.
I'm gonna have a test.
You're going there?
I can't, so.
I know.
My girlfriend's family.
Have fun.
Yeah.
See you guys in
Hey, we should probably plan when we come back on the 6th.
Yeah, that'd be good.
That's when we'll really need a drink.
Hey guys, on the 6th, class, on the 6th when we come back, that evening, let's go to the bar and drink. Don't keep that, look. Now let's celebrate the fresh new year.
I like your plan.
That's barely.
So please, make sure that you don't have plans for that
By the
Saturday.
number,
Please
but
go at least
go
for
by
a quick half an hour.
Okay, Mom.
Please.
Right. What's that?
I thought, oh no.
January 6th, when we come back, then we'll go half an hour
Oh,
drink and then go or so.
Hey,
I thought we were
I'm ready after every class.
Any
Any opportunity to drink. My office is right here, right? So we usually right here on MNC. So we go to the wicket roof over there. He comes down and says that's the down floor. I said, let's meet in the wicket for 5 minutes. We are there, all of them. Yeah, it's not. It's not. Come up and give an excuse for here. Yeah.
What were you reading? Space.com?
No, actually. I'm pretty good walk with friends though. They would take place and you know the place.
I'm gonna ask,
What is the tax way to?
Somebody has to figure out how to get that sentence.
You know, but that's what
Earlier.
civilization.
It would have been so great.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, are you gonna be, you're gonna meet us there?
Happy holidays, my
Thank you.
The last piece is a baklava.
Well, I should do it.
Okay.
I will actually do it. There's no freedom.
What was your question?
You
What was the question? About background?
Oh yeah, you're the one that. Yeah.
Let's go.
So I'm like, asking the best one.
These are opening now, yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, then I know the staff at least.
Am I not give my wife?
By the end of January, now she'll have a taste. Fabulous.
Yeah, this is
I
better.
don't know if that's where you guys can get your.
Thank you.
You stand corrected.
Presentation, you go and tell me this. You throw me off.
I put in the scientific method into this, okay?
Alright, have a great
Thank you. You too. Have a great holiday.
Bye, Mama.
I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm going to Denmark and Sweden.
Oh, really?
Oh, nice.
Vacation?
Yeah, I'm visiting my friend. She moved there. So, I'm excited.
I don't
I don't care. It's good.
Professor,
They're
just
expensive.
open your
Everything's
gift just so you can
expensive
see what it
there.
is. I wanna see the look on your face.
I will.
They're
Makes sense.
I wanna see the look on your face.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the rich.
Very thoughtful. That
Yes.
would be.
No, not yet.
Well, that's useful, right?
You'll never have to worry about that.
That's nice.
Professor Dominic got the equivalent value in champagne.
Yeah,
Right? But you don't drink, so we're like, what?
No, I don't drink.
I know. That's what we said. I go, he doesn't drink. Not getting him alcohol.
No, that's nice. Thank you.
A bottle of champagne's not drinking, you know, it's celebratory, but you know.
This is better. More useful.
More useful.
No more lots of things.
Because, you know why? We got the idea, you were up there and all the markers you had were, you couldn't write. You had to go back to the green one or whatever it was. So.
Well, but now you have an assortment of colors, so now you can make the graph very colorful.
Yeah.
Key
This
one,
line
key two,
is
they're
this
gonna
color,
be-
this line is this
Excuse
color.
me. All right, guys.
This curve.
Let's go.
Alright, take care.
Alright.
Right,
So,
did we get
where are we
everything?
going?
Jax.
Happy holidays and Merry Christmas, everyone.
Looks like a good roof?
Or no?
Woo!
Because
Come on, Maha.
Oh, what you want?
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Oh, boy, all right.
Oh, good. You have barely even touched it.